They say family never turns its back on you. But mine did the moment money entered the room. I'm Norma, and this is the story of how love turned into betrayal, and how laughter in a courtroom became the sound of their downfall. I grew up believing I was lucky. My parents had a house, a small shop, and a name everyone respected. People would tell me, "Your father is an honest man." I used to smile proudly, but pride is blind. My childhood memories are stitched with both warmth and warning signs. My mother's voice calling me for dinner. My father's hand on my shoulder, heavy and commanding. Every good moment came with a condition, every smile a price. When I was 18, I wanted to study law. My father laughed. He said, "Women don't belong in courtrooms, they belong at home." So I stayed home. I learned to cook, clean, and fold dreams into silence. But inside, I always wanted to prove him wrong. Years passed. I found small freelance work online, secret projects that paid little but gave me pride. I hid that income from my parents, not because I wanted to deceive them, but because I wanted something that was mine. Then, one evening, my father came home with a heavy envelope. He said, "Your grandfather's will is finally being processed. The property will be divided soon." I didn't think much of it. I loved my grandfather, but I never expected anything. 2 days later, my father asked me to sign a paper. "Just a family acknowledgement," he said. I signed without reading. I trusted him. And that trust was the biggest mistake of my life. Weeks later, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low but sharp. My mother whispered, "Do you think she'll find out?" And my father said, "It doesn't matter. Once it's sold, it's done." My heart started racing. Sold. What was being sold? I waited until they left for the market and searched the drawer in their bedroom. The same envelope lay there. My grandfather's will. I opened it with trembling hands. The words blurred through my tears. The property, the house, the land, the savings, everything my grandfather owned, was meant to be shared between my parents and me. But the paper I had signed, it was a waiver. A legal document stating that I had given up all my rights to the inheritance. I sat on the floor, shaking. My parents had tricked me. When they came home, I confronted them. "Why did you do this?" cried. My father didn't even look guilty. He said, "You're just a girl. You'll marry and leave. Why should you get anything?" My mother looked at me with pity instead of love. "Don't make this ugly, Norma. You're young. You'll be fine." Fine. They had taken everything I had. Not just the inheritance, but the belief that I mattered to them. I packed my bag that night and left the house. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay where love was measured in signatures. For months I struggled. Rented a single room. Worked part-time in a law clerk's office. Ironically, I started learning about wills, rights, and property cases. Each case I typed for someone else reminded me of my own story. Each stamp on paper felt like a bruise on my heart. One evening, as I sat reviewing files, my senior looked over my shoulder and said, "You're sharp, Norma. You'd make a good lawyer." And I thought, maybe this is how I'll get justice. Not by crying, but by knowing the truth. A year later, I received a notice. It was addressed to me, from my father. Property dispute. He had sold everything and was now facing an investigation, and he blamed me for interfering. They wanted me in court as a witness, but the tone of the letter was almost mocking. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "Let's see how brave you are now." I remember standing in front of the mirror that night. The same face they had called weak looked back at me. Older, stronger, colder. I decided I would go. Not as their daughter, but as someone they could no longer control. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray. Rain tapped on the window as if warning me. I walked to the courthouse in a plain black dress, carrying nothing but truth in my hands. When I entered the courtroom, my parents were already there. My father smirked. My mother smiled faintly, the same smile she gave me when she lied. And then my father whispered loud enough for me to hear, "She actually showed up." They laughed. The sound echoed through the cold marble room like knives scraping glass. I didn't cry. I just looked at them, two people who had given me life and then tried to erase it. The judge entered, calling the room to order. The case began. My father's lawyer spoke first, painting me as a greedy daughter who wanted to ruin her own family. He said I'd forged documents, caused trouble, and acted against my parents' wishes. Each word burned, but I stayed silent. My turn would come. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood. I said, "Your Honor, I have evidence, but not of what they accuse me of. I have evidence of what they've done to me." And that's when the entire courtroom went still. But before I could speak further, my father's lawyer interrupted, saying, "Let's not waste the court's time. The will was already executed. The property is theirs." The judge nodded slowly and said, "In that case, we'll proceed to verify the contents of the will itself." He opened a sealed envelope and unfolded a document with careful hands. It was my grandfather's original will, the one my father claimed to have already settled. My parents exchanged quick, uneasy glances. The judge began to read. And that's where everything started to unravel. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of pages turning. The judge's eyes scanned the paper carefully. His expression unreadable. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My parents sat only a few feet away, but it felt like 1,000 miles. My father leaned back in his chair, confident as ever. My mother kept her gaze fixed on the judge, but I could see the tremor in her hands. And then the judge spoke. "This document states that the inheritance was to be divided equally between Mr. and Mrs. Harris, and their daughter Norma Harris." The moment those words left his mouth, my mother's eyes widened. My father straightened abruptly in his chair. I felt a sting of tears, not because I was happy, but because those few lines proved I hadn't been crazy all along. The judge continued, "Any alteration or waiver signed by the beneficiary must be validated under witness and verified by the estate attorney." He lifted his eyes toward my father. "Can you confirm that was done?" My father shifted in his seat. "Of course, Your Honor." She signed voluntarily. The judge raised a brow. "And was it witnessed?" Silence. For the first time, my father didn't have an answer. I could see his lawyer frown, flipping through his papers in panic. My mother looked at him, her lips trembling. The judge exhaled slowly and set the paper down. "Mr. Harris, you understand falsifying legal documents regarding inheritance is a federal offense?" A murmur spread through the room. My father's confident mask cracked for the first time. He stammered, "There must be a mistake. The waiver was, she knew." The judge's tone hardened. "Miss Harris, do you have any copy or record of correspondence related to your grandfather's will?" I nodded, reaching into my bag. I had carried those papers with me every single day for a year. Bank receipts, old letters, even a photo of me and my grandfather holding the property document together. As I handed them over, my fingers shook. This was it, the moment that would either free me or destroy me. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression softening slightly. "These letters from your grandfather clearly mention your share. And these signatures." He paused. "They match his handwriting perfectly." He looked at my father. "Did you alter or withhold the original will from court submission?" My father's face turned red. "No. Absolutely not." But his voice cracked, and the room felt it. Then came something I didn't expect. The judge said, "I see a second document here, sealed, marked as private addendum. It seems your grandfather left additional instructions." My parents looked at each other, startled. Even I had never seen that file before. The clerk stepped forward and broke the seal. The judge unfolded a smaller letter, handwritten, faded, and fragile. He began to read aloud. "If this letter is being read, it means I am gone. I leave behind not just wealth but memories, some of which must never be forgotten. To my daughter and her husband I give my blessings. But to my granddaughter Norma, I leave my heart, my pride, and something they can never buy: the truth." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Should anyone attempt to alter or steal her share, I trust the court will protect her as I once tried to. Tears blurred my vision. I heard my mother whisper, "Oh God," under her breath. The judge folded the letter carefully. "Mr. Harris," he said, "it seems your father left very clear instructions." My father didn't respond. He just sat there, frozen, a man who had built his life on lies, watching them crumble. The judge leaned back. "Given these revelations, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the handling of this estate. Any fraudulent transfer will be temporarily suspended." My parents' lawyer objected, shouting, "Your Honor, this is an ambush. The girl is manipulating." The judge cut him off sharply. "Enough. The evidence speaks for itself." I wanted to smile, but I couldn't. I just stood there, feeling the weight of years lift and then return all at once. Justice was close, but not yet mine. As the hearing adjourned, my father turned toward me. His eyes were cold, burning with hatred. He hissed, "You think this is over? You have no idea what I'm capable of." My mother touched his arm softly, trying to stop him, but he shook her hand away. I walked past them without looking back. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like something new. Not peace, but the beginning of it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, the man who saw the truth long before I did. Why had he written that letter? What did he mean by "something they can never buy"? The truth. There had to be more. I decided to visit his old lawyer, Mr. Latham, the next day. He was retired now, living alone near the countryside. When I called him, he said, "I've been expecting you." When I arrived at his small cottage, he welcomed me in quietly. He was old, frail, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who had kept too many secrets. "Norma," he said, handing me tea, "your grandfather loved you more than anyone. He told me once that he feared what your parents might do." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Did he ever mention another will?" Mr. Latham smiled faintly. "He didn't need another will. He left something else entirely." He reached for a wooden box on the shelf. Inside it was a sealed envelope, thick, old, and marked with my name. He said softly, "He told me to give this to you when the time felt right." I held it in my trembling hands. "Why now?" I asked. "Because," he said, "your parents have already shown the world who they are. Now it's time the world knows who you are." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were several old documents, but one in particular stood out. A second will, dated a week after the first one. At the bottom was a single line that made my heart stop. "This will supersedes all previous versions and shall only be opened by a court if my granddaughter, Norma, is present." Mr. Latham looked at me quietly and said, "Your grandfather was smarter than all of them combined." I felt tears fill my eyes. For the first time I realized, this wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for his memory. I thanked Mr. Latham and promised I would take it to court. As I walked out, the evening sun fell through the trees, painting everything gold. It felt like my grandfather was with me, guiding me toward the truth he'd hidden in plain sight. And I knew the next hearing wouldn't just reveal the truth. It would end everything my parents had built on lies. The next morning came with a strange calm. I woke up before dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling the quiet hum of everything I had endured. Outside, the first light crept through my curtains, washing the walls in pale gold. I sat up, still clutching that sealed envelope like it was a piece of my soul. Inside it was my chance, the truth my grandfather wanted the world to hear. When I reached the courthouse, I saw them again, my parents. My mother avoided my gaze, her face pale, while my father stood tall, his arrogance returning like armor. "Back again," he said bitterly. "Some people don't know when to stop losing." I didn't respond. I had learned long ago that silence hurt him more than words ever could. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors, and the same judge from before entered. The crowd quieted, the air thick with tension. The judge glanced between us. "Miss Harris, I was informed you have new evidence." "Yes, Your Honor," I said, rising. "It's a document my grandfather left in the custody of his attorney, Mr. Latham. A second will." The judge's eyes sharpened. "Is Mr. Latham present?" The old man stood up slowly from the back row, his cane tapping gently against the floor. "Here, Your Honor." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as he handed over the sealed envelope. The judge examined it carefully. The wax was still intact, the paper edges browned with time. He broke the seal, unfolded the pages, and began to read aloud. "I, Jonathan Harris, being of sound mind, hereby declare this my final will. I have amended the previous document to ensure the rightful inheritance of my granddaughter, Norma Harris. She alone shall inherit the primary property, accounts, and family business in her name. This decision is made after deep reflection and shall not be challenged by any party, regardless of relation." The room erupted in murmurs. My father's face drained of color. He slammed his palm on the table. "This is nonsense." He was senile by then. The judge frowned. "There's no record of mental instability in Mr. Jonathan Harris's final medical report." I glanced at Mr. Latham. He gave a small nod, calm and certain. He had prepared for this. The judge continued reading. "If my daughter or her husband attempt to claim otherwise, it should be understood that my decision came from love, not anger. They chose distance. Norma chose loyalty." I felt tears sting my eyes again. Every word was a memory of all the nights I spent by my grandfather's bedside when they didn't even visit. To my daughter and son-in-law, I leave a single condition: to reflect. Because sometimes, the only way to see what we've lost is when it's no longer ours. The judge placed the papers down and exhaled. "I see no reason to doubt the authenticity of this will." The silence that followed was heavy. Then the judge turned to my parents. "Do you wish to contest it formally?" My father's lawyer whispered something to him. But for once my father said nothing. His lips pressed into a hard line. When the session ended, I walked out quietly. Every step felt lighter, but somewhere inside, there was still a wound that justice couldn't reach. As I reached the courtyard, my mother followed me. Her heels clicked on the marble behind me until she stopped, just a few feet away. "Norma," she whispered. "Turn slowly." Her voice trembled, fragile and uncertain. "I didn't know about what your father did. I swear I didn't." I looked at her, the woman who once brushed my hair before school, who used to call me her little sunshine. But years of silence stood between us now, like a wall that neither of us knew how to climb. "Then why didn't you stop him?" asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I was scared. He threatened me to. I thought he'd ruin us all." I nodded slowly. "And he did." She looked down, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Norma." For a moment I wanted to forgive her. But forgiveness doesn't come from words, it comes from actions, and hers were still missing. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. "But I can't keep being the one who gets hurt." She wiped her eyes. "Please, don't let this make you like him." "I won't," I whispered and walked away. Outside I sat on the courthouse steps. The autumn breeze brushed past, carrying the faint scent of rain. I pulled out the old photograph of my grandfather and me, the one where he's smiling, hand on my shoulder, proud. "Thank you," I murmured, "for believing in me when no one else did." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the broken one. Felt like the survivor. But peace never lasts long when greed is still alive. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Mr. Latham. His voice sounded tense. "Norma, you need to come to my office. It's urgent." When I arrived, I saw the look on his face. Tired, troubled. He closed the blinds and locked the door. "I didn't tell you everything that day," he said quietly. "There was another envelope in your grandfather's box. He instructed me not to open it unless something went wrong." He pulled it out from his drawer, smaller than the first one, marked with a single line. In case of deception. What does that mean? Asked. He hesitated. It means your grandfather knew someone might try again. He handed me the letter, and I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, written in his familiar graceful handwriting, was a confession. Not from him but from my father. If you're reading this, it means I found what I wasn't supposed to. My son-in-law altered the records of my business before I passed. He forged my signature on several contracts, diverting funds into his name. If discovered, this could destroy the family's reputation. But if it ever comes to light, let the world know who he truly was. The room felt like it tilted. I looked at Mr. Latham, my breath shallow. He forged everything. Yes, he said grimly. And if we submit this letter, he won't just lose the property. He could face criminal charges. I sank into the chair trying to process it. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about truth. About the years he spent convincing everyone that I was ungrateful, while he stole everything behind the scenes. What would my grandfather want me to do? I whispered. Mr. Latham's eyes softened. He wanted you to have peace. But he also wanted you to have courage. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Answered. It was my father. His voice was colder than ever. So, he said, you think you've won? I didn't win, I replied quietly. I just stopped losing. He laughed bitterly. You always thought you were smarter. But let me remind you, Norma, I built this family. I can destroy you too. Maybe, I said. But not this time. And I hung up. The next morning I submitted the letter to the court. The judge reviewed it, and the investigation deepened. Within days, the financial records began to surface. Every forgery, every transaction. Reporters started showing up outside the courthouse. Headlines spread like wildfire. Prominent businessman under investigation for fraud. Daughter's testimony reveals hidden will. My father's empire began to crumble. And my mother. She disappeared from the public eye entirely. Weeks later, the final verdict was announced. The judge read the decision slowly, clearly. Based on the evidence, the court recognizes Miss Norma Harris as the rightful heir to her grandfather's estate. Further, the court finds sufficient grounds to pursue legal action against Mr. Harris for document forgery and fraud. My father's lawyer dropped his pen. My mother gasped softly. I just sat there frozen. The judge's final words echoed through the room. Justice is not revenge. It's remembrance of what's right. When the gavel struck, something inside me finally broke, but in a good way. The years of silence, the tears, the loneliness, they had all led here. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sky opened up, gentle rain falling over the city. I looked up, smiling faintly through the tears. I didn't just win a case. I found myself again. I thought the story had ended when the gavel fell. That justice had finally spoken, and that I could finally rest. But I was wrong. Because what came after was not peace. It was revelation. For weeks I tried to move on. The house that once echoed with laughter and betrayal was now mine, but it didn't feel like home. Every room was heavy with memory. Every wall still whispered his voice. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in my grandfather's study, I found a wooden chest hidden behind a bookshelf. It was locked, small and old, carved with the initials J.H. I almost didn't open it. But something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe unfinished love, told me to. I found the key tucked inside one of his worn-out jackets. When I unlocked it, I expected papers or maybe old medals. Instead, I found letters. Dozens of them, each one sealed and neatly tied with ribbon. They were all addressed to me. My breath caught. Hands trembling, I opened the first one. My dearest Norma. If you are reading this, it means you found your strength, the one I always saw in you. Forgive me for what I am about to confess. You may think I chose you because of love alone, But the truth runs deeper. I stopped reading. My eyes blurred with tears. I sat down, clutching the letter. He continued, "Your father was not always cruel. He once was the boy who built dreams beside me. But greed grows quietly like a vine. He fell for promises made by men who saw only profit, not people. And when I confronted him, he turned his back on me." I swallowed hard. He knew everything. All those years ago he saw the betrayal coming. "I did not leave you everything because I wanted revenge. I did it because I knew you were the only one who would not sell this family's soul. You were the only one who still believed in good." My tears fell freely now. He had seen me, truly seen me, when the rest of the world had turned away. If your parents ever understand what they lost, let them. But never lose yourself in trying to make them see your worth. Remember, love does not beg. It stands. I pressed the letter against my chest and closed my eyes. He had carried that wisdom silently, all while pretending not to notice the storm tearing our family apart. Days passed as I read one letter after another. Each one was filled with memories. Stories from his youth, mistakes he made, the hopes he carried for me. He wrote about how he watched me grow from the window of his study, how my laughter used to fill the house like sunlight. He wrote about how my father's ambition changed after he lost his first big deal, and how my mother slowly surrendered her voice to fear. "People don't become cruel overnight," he wrote. "They become lost. And the longer they wander, the harder it becomes to come home." Those words stayed with me. A few days later I received a letter, but not from my grandfather this time. It was from the prison warden. My father wanted to see me. First I refused. What could he possibly say that would change anything? But as I reread my grandfather's words, something inside me softened. He always said, "Justice without compassion is still half empty." So I went. The room was cold, the light harsh. He looked different, smaller somehow. His once proud eyes were tired, his hands trembling slightly. He looked up as I entered. "So you came," he said quietly. "I did." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, "You destroyed me." I didn't respond. There was no point arguing with ghosts of choices he had made himself. But then he said something I didn't expect. "I read the papers," he muttered. "They said I forged everything. But they didn't say why." "Why?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Because I wanted to build something bigger. Something my father never could. But he didn't believe in me. He called me reckless. He said I'd lose everything. And maybe I wanted to prove him wrong so badly, I stopped caring about how." His eyes met mine, filled with regret that came too late. "I was wrong, Norma," he said softly. "And I hate that it took prison bars for me to see it." For a moment, the silence between us was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much he broke me. But instead I just whispered, "You didn't need to destroy others to prove your worth." He looked down. "I know." Then he reached into his pocket and slid a folded note across the table. "I was supposed to give this to you years ago. But I never had the courage." It was a small letter in my grandfather's handwriting, dated just 2 days before he died. "Opened it. If you ever find this, it means I still hoped your father would do the right thing. I wanted to believe that love could heal pride. But if he couldn't, then let forgiveness be your final inheritance, not hatred." My hand shook. That was his final lesson. When I left the prison, the world outside felt brighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was finally free from the weight of it all. That night, I visited my grandfather's grave for the first time since the verdict. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of rain and earth. I knelt, placing the last letter beside his name. "I read them all," I whispered. "And I think I understand now." I smiled through tears. "You didn't just leave me your property. You left me your strength. Your heart." For a long time I stayed there, just listening to the quiet. Then I said softly, "I forgive them, Grandpa. Not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace." And in that moment, the heaviness that had followed me for years finally lifted. Life slowly began to bloom again. I reopened my grandfather's small company, renaming it Harris Legacy Foundation. Instead of chasing wealth, we began funding scholarships for young girls. Girls who, like me, were told their voices didn't matter. Each day when I walked through the new office, I saw his portrait on the wall. That same gentle smile. And below it, his favorite words. Character is not built in comfort. It's forged in storms. Every decision I made carried that echo. Months later, I received a letter from my mother. It wasn't long, just a single page. Norma, I've moved away. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I've started over. You were right. I was weak. But seeing what you've become, maybe there's hope for me too. I folded it carefully and placed it inside the same chest where my grandfather's letters rested. Because even broken things deserve a place to heal. The last time I visited the courtroom, it was empty. No audience, no gavel, no judgment. Just silence. I stood there for a while, remembering the girl who had once walked in trembling, holding her pain like armor. Now she was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone who had learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. I survived. Before I left, I looked up at the bench where the judge had once sat. And quietly, to no one in particular, I said, they laughed when I entered the courtroom. But they stopped laughing when truth spoke. And with that I walked away. Into a future my grandfather had always believed I deserved. I used to think forgiveness meant letting people off the hook. That it was surrender, weakness wrapped in nice words. But I've learned something else. Forgiveness is not forgetting what they did. It's remembering, and deciding you won't let it break you anymore. Months passed since the courtroom silence faded. The world moved on, but inside me the echoes remained. Some nights, I still woke up hearing my father's voice, or the sound of that gavel striking wood. But now it didn't make me tremble. It reminded me of how far I'd come. The estate was finally settled. The old Harris mansion, once a symbol of pride and pain, became something new. I turned it into a shelter for women who had nowhere else to go. Every wall that once heard anger now heard laughter, courage, and stories of rebuilding. One morning, a young girl named Leah approached me as I was reviewing papers. She couldn't have been older than 16. Her voice was soft when she said, "Miss Norma, is it true your family betrayed you?" I paused, looking at her, those same wide, uncertain eyes I once had. "Yes," I said. "They did." She hesitated. "And you forgave them?" I smiled faintly. "I'm still learning to." She frowned. "Why? They hurt you." Closed my notebook. "Because if I don't, the hurt wins twice." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. And in that moment I realized what my grandfather had meant all along. That love doesn't always fix people, but it fixes us. A few months later, I received news that my father's health was failing. He had been moved to a medical facility within the prison. At first, I didn't plan to visit. What could I possibly say? But something inside me wouldn't rest. Maybe closure wasn't something that arrived. Maybe it was something you gave. When I saw him again, he looked frail. The man who once stood tall, commanding rooms, now struggled to even lift his head. When he saw me, he smiled weakly. "I didn't think you'd come." I sat down quietly. "I almost didn't." He coughed softly, then said, "You remind me of her, of your mother. Stronger, though." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally he whispered, "Do you hate me?" I looked at him, really looked. At the man who raised me, who broke me, and who, in his own twisted way, once loved me. And I said the truth. "No. I just wish you had loved differently." He nodded slowly, tears pooling in his eyes. "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry." It was the first time I'd ever heard those words from him. And though it didn't erase the years of pain, it eased something heavy inside me. When I left that day, I didn't look back. But as I walked through the corridor, a strange peace settled over me. like a door had finally closed, softly but completely. A few weeks later, he passed away quietly in his sleep. When I received the call, I didn't cry. Instead, I sat by the window, looking out at the rising sun, and whispered, "I hope you found your way home, Dad." And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. Forgiveness wasn't about giving him peace. It was about giving myself permission to live again. Years later, people would ask me, "How did you survive all that?" And I'd smile and say, "I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I chose not to stay broken." The mansion continued to grow, now home to dozens of women and children. Every corner was filled with stories of loss, healing, and quiet triumph. And sometimes when the afternoon sun hit the old staircase, I could almost see him there, my grandfather, watching, smiling. His words still guide me. "The world will measure your worth in gold and names. But I will always measure it in kindness and courage." And that's what I built my life on. On the anniversary of his passing, I visited his grave again. I brought a single white rose, his favorite. As I knelt, I whispered, "You were right, Grandpa. Love doesn't beg, stands." And I'm still standing. The breeze picked up, brushing my hair gently across my face. For a moment it felt like he was right there beside me. When I returned home, I sat by the window and opened the very first letter he had ever written me. The ink had faded, the paper yellowed with time. But the words still burned bright. "One day you'll face the world alone, and it will try to break you. But when it does, remember, you come from strength, not sorrow. You come from love, not loss. And you will rise." I smiled through tears, closing the letter carefully. Then I whispered, "I did rise." They laughed when I entered that courtroom. They saw a broken girl standing against an empire. But they didn't see what was behind me, a legacy of love, courage, and truth. And when the judge read the will aloud, it wasn't just my grandfather's words they heard. It was his faith in me echoing through every sentence. That day, justice was served. But more importantly, love was remembered. So if you ever find yourself fighting alone, if everyone turns against you, if your truth is buried under their lies, because sometimes the loudest victory is simply refusing to stay silent.